Hello, my name is Tony Dong. US, Russia agreed to collaborate on backing ceasefire in southwest Syria. The United States and Russia have agreed to collaborate on backing a ceasefire in southwest Syria, US officials said Friday. The agreement discussed by President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin during their meeting Friday at the Group of 20 summit in Hamburg would mark the first collaborative operation between Washington and Moscow since they began backing opposing sides in Syria's civil war, which began almost 6 years ago. This is our first indication of the US and Russia being able to work together in Syria, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, in Hamburg with Trump, told reporters after the meeting. We had a very lengthy discussion regarding other areas in Syria where we can continue to work together, he said. Forces loyal to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and opposition fighters have been battling in and around the cities of Daraa and Quneitra in Syria's southwest corner, escalating concerns in Jordan and Israel have increased spillover into those countries. The Jordanian government, worried about additional flows of Syrian refugees across its already flooded border, said in an announcement that it also is a party to the deal. Tillerson said the three governments signed a memorandum including well-defined agreements on who will secure this area. He did not offer details. Israeli warplanes have struck Syrian government forces several times in the area in recent months, most recently 3 weeks ago in retaliation for what Israel said were 10 Syrian government projectiles that flew across the border into the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Russian aircraft also have conducted bombing operations around US officials, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss closed-door discussions with Russia, said the agreement on southwestern Syria has been the subject of sporadic talks between them for months. The officials described the US role in the deal as one of restraining rebel forces and monitoring the ceasefire lines, presumably along with Jordan. They gave no indication that US troops would be directly involved. The area under discussion is far from US military activity against the Islamic State in northern and central Syria. The primary US aim, officials said, has been that the Russians would cease all air operations in the area and prevent Syrian planes from flying, effectively instituting a no-fly zone. Russia would be responsible for keeping Assad and allied forces within parameters of a ceasefire, and both sides would be responsible for ensuring the free movement of humanitarian assistance to civilians. Mohammad Momani, Jordan's Minister of State for Media Affairs, said Friday that the ceasefire will take place along a line of contact agreed upon between Syrian government forces and associated troops on one side and rebels on the other, according to Petra, the Jordanian news agency. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov first spoke publicly about the possibility of collaboration in southwestern Syria when he met with Trump and Tillerson in May. At the time, Lavrov told reporters that Trump had expressed interest in cooperation to stabilize the southwestern area in telephone conversations with Putin early this year, and that details had been further discussed during Tillerson's visit to Moscow in April. Lavrov's Washington news conference at the time placed the possible agreement in the context of broader Syrian ceasefire talks that were begun by Russia, Iran and Turkey late last year. Those talks outlined 4 separate ceasefire areas, including the southwest. The Trump administration, however, has refused to participate directly in those talks because of Iran's participation, and US officials said the administration considered discussions about a ceasefire in the southwest to be a separate matter. Tillerson alluded to a possible agreement Wednesday, when he departed Washington to join Trump in Hamburg. The United States is prepared to explore the possibility of establishing with Russia joint mechanisms for ensuring stability, including no-fly zones, on-the-ground ceasefire observers, and coordinated delivery of humanitarian assistance, he said in a statement issued by the State Department. Were at the very beginning, Tillerson later told reporters, speaking of Trump's first face-to-face meeting with Putin, And at this point it's very difficult to say what Russia's intentions are in this relationship. And I think that's the most important part of this meeting, is to have a good exchange between President Trump and President Putin over what they both see as the nature of this relationship between our two countries. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here. Represent our country well and fight for its interests. The Kremlin has said that Putin wants the United States to hand back 2 compounds that the previous administration seized in late December in retaliation for Russia's actions in the US campaign. The Trump administration has already indicated it might return those compounds, which the Obama administration said were being used to gather intelligence. But Trump is facing bipartisan opposition at home not to lift sanctions against what many in Washington see as an adversary intent on weakening democratic institutions and diminishing US global leadership. The return of these 2 facilities to Russia, while the Kremlin refuses to address its influence campaign against the United States, would embolden President Vladimir Putin and invite a dangerous escalation in the Kremlin's destabilizing actions against democracies worldwide, sends Gene Shahin DNH, Marco Rubio Avila, and Johnny Isaac-Sanaga, all members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, wrote in a letter to Trump on Thursday. The Senate recently voted 97-2 in favor of a Russian sanctions amendment to the Iran sanctions bill that would require congressional review of any decision to overturn or lift existing policies on Russia, including the return of these 2 dachas, and would impose new sanctions to deter Russian aggression against the US and its allies. In a speech in Poland, Trump gave mixed signals on the eve of the summit, urging Russia to cease its destabilizing activities in Ukraine and elsewhere, and its support for hostile regimes including Syria and Iran. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, said in a briefing Friday that Putin was told about the remarks and that the Russian leader is taking that into account. "Let's wait for the results of the meeting," Peskov said. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Along with that note Thursday, Trump also repeated a position shared by Putin, saying that nobody really knows who was behind the hacking during the US presidential campaign, and questioning US intelligence agencies' affirmation of Russia's involvement because they were wrong about whether Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction before the US invasion in 2003. That both of these statements align with the Kremlin's own stance on the election hacking creates another interesting look for the US president, who once famously wanted Putin to be his new best friend. More recently, Trump caused a stir when he met with Lavrov in the White House and shared intelligence on the Islamic State provided to the United States by Israel. There's also the sense expressed by Russian observers that Putin, the seasoned leader with a clear objective, notoriously well prepared and ever the operative, will have a notable advantage over a neophyte politician who has so far led the free world in fitful jerks and stops that have left even America's closest allies confused. And while Peskov this week warned against expecting anything more than a get-to-know-you meeting, Tillerson this week floated a proposal that would expand US-Russian cooperation on Syria. In advance of the Trump-Putin meeting, Tillerson held an hour-long conversation with Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Ministry said. The parties discussed key topics on the international and bilateral agenda, read the ministry's statement. Peskov on Thursday said Putin would raise Russia's concerns that Ukraine is violating the Minsk peace accords, which call for a ceasefire in the 3-year-old war with pro-Russian separatists. US sanctions over Russia's annexation of Crimea were broadened to punish Moscow for backing the separatists militarily, which Putin has denied. Ukraine said a recently captured soldier it said was working for the Russian military is further proof. Putin was expected to pressure Trump to back a de-escalation plan for the Korean peninsula that would have North Korea halt its ballistic missile program and the United States and South Korea call off their large-scale military drills. Above all, Putin is hoping to forge a relationship that will open the way for deal-making later on, if and when domestic pressure on Trump over Russian meddling abates, even if it means putting up with Trump's mixed signals. Jenna Johnson in Washington contributed to this report. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.